apparently Donald Trump has declared war on sanctuary cities, including Chicago, Memphis, and all of these other things. Now, there's an article from the New York Times that's telling us what the secret agenda is. Let's see how they're going to try to manipulate what Trump's war on sanctuary cities is really about. That's the title. No overt manipulation right away, except for, of course, the word war. That's a bit inflammatory. A movement born in churches. Hey, it's born in churches, man. This thing was born in churches. If it was born in churches, then you know what? The entire idea of sanctuary cities should be sanctioned by anyone who is a Republican or a conservative or a Christian, because it was born in churches. That is the implication here. I know it's not 100% overt. That's the point. To help vulnerable immigrants has become a constitutional battleground. And I'm like, okay, vulnerable? Why are they vulnerable? They're vulnerable because they are illegal. And because they are illegal, they are not allowed to use the same services that legal immigrants or just legal citizens are, such as going to the police to report crimes, being a normal citizen with the responsibilities and the benefits. You're illegal. That is going to make you vulnerable to certain things. It also makes you immune to other things, gives you advantages in the sense of like, all right, do you have to pay taxes? You're not a citizen. So no, not really. It's not to say you don't pay taxes on anything. But again, the idea of vulnerable here, that is to manipulate you. They're trying to paint illegal immigrants as a vulnerable victim, a completely innocent victim of just horrible, terrible, racist policies. And again, this was born in churches. Don't you know? Are you a bad Christian? It's become a constitutional battleground in Chicago and Portland, Oregon. Donald J. Trump has been railing against sanctuary cities for a decade, describing them as hotbeds of crime. Is Chicago a hotbed of crime? Yes. I think anyone who has a functioning pair of eyeballs, or no, not even that, if you have either eyeballs or ears that work, and you listen at all to what people say about Chicago, it is a hotbed of crime. Now, maybe that is purely because the officials are ineffective, inefficient, corrupt, clueless, stupid, or actually want, for whatever reason, to destroy their city. And therefore, the illegal immigration issue has almost no bearing on the fact that it's a crime-ridden hellscape. Possibly. Portland, Oregon, probably, yeah, you could make that argument a little bit better for Portland, Oregon. The officials, the people there, actually just like the idea of crime. Not in the super obvious sense, but the idea that you're being forgiving. Crime is not really a crime. It's not that, when someone commits a crime, they are inflicting an act of violence and force against society in general and the actual person who is being victimized by that crime, the person that's being assaulted, the person that's being stolen from, that's being murdered. No. It's them, but also society in general, because the reverberations of these crimes occur throughout everyone. They reverberate throughout the fabric of society, and they make your city worse if they are allowed to run rampant. And in Portland, they are allowed to run rampant because it's the noble thing to do to go, no. It's not the criminal's fault. It's society's fault. It is society's fault that these crimes are happening. Anyone would do those crimes if they were put in these circumstances. And therefore, we cannot blame the criminal for the criminal act. So we should forgive them and we should rehabilitate them. The fact that the rehabilitation has not worked for, a lot of these individuals, they've been committing crimes dozens of times. They're arrested, if they're arrested at all, and they're let out the same day to commit more crimes. Okay? Do we need to go in to the amount of people that this happened to? All right, let's mention Irina. The person who murdered her had been arrested, I think it's 14 times, or in police custody 14 times. Clearly a mental case, that needed to be institutionalized off the streets was a danger to everyone around him. Okay. Is it good for both that person, who's now, I'm assuming, going to be in prison forever, and also the victims, and just, again, society in general? Is it good for any of those people, for those people to be forgiven, let out on the streets? No problem, whatever, go ahead, go nuts. It's bad for everyone involved. Magnets for undocumented immigrants. Well, I mean, I would imagine if a city says, hey, undocumented immigrants come here, I'm guessing, yeah, there are going to be magnets for undocumented immigrants. Attacking them was a staple of both of his presidential campaigns, so it was hardly a surprise when he signed an executive order in April directing the Attorney General and the Homeland Security Secretary to pursue all necessary legal remedies and enforcement measures to force cities and states to implement federal immigration laws. A White House news release that accompanied the executive order quoted a note that the president posted on Truth Social a few weeks earlier. No more sanctuary cities, he wrote. They protect the criminals, not the victims. Now, that's kind of just a true statement. Whether or not you agree that illegal immigration should or should not be illegal, as it stands right now, it is illegal, and therefore unlawful entry into the country makes you a criminal. Not necessarily the worst type of criminal. There are degrees to these things, but yes, you are a criminal. And the victims, not only of, violent crime that is being imported, not only victims of drug overdoses from drug smuggling, not only, victims of trafficking, but society in general. The fact that you have unchecked immigration, again, Bernie Sanders agrees with me on this. You are hurting the entire country by making Americans, American workers, compete with the rest of the world for their jobs. That's not a good position to be in if you're looking to get employed. They are disgracing our country and are being mocked all over the world. That's true. Speaking as someone who, listens to people from other countries, it's like, no, like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? That's completely insane. Working on papers to withhold all federal funding for any city or state that allows these death traps to exist. In the 6 months since, we've learned what enforcement measures look like. Hundreds of officers from several federal agencies swarming city centers, apprehending unauthorized migrants, and sometimes American citizens. Now, here's the other side of this. Sometimes American citizens, the reason this is happening is because the problem is so large and so unwieldy that to solve this problem, as you would with any other large, incredible societal issue, you're going to have mistakes. So, if you don't want American citizens to be apprehended in illegal migrant roundups, you should not have 10 million illegal immigrants come in under Joe Biden. Maybe the number is wrong. Millions for sure, though. Okay, you shouldn't have 50 million illegal immigrants in the United States. If you didn't have that enormous number of people, you wouldn't need the kind of action that is going to grab innocent civilians in the process. Unfortunately, that's the case. That's where we're at right now. And you can't ignore this. You have to deal with it somehow. Whatever solution that you're going to propose is going to mean that innocent civilians are going to catch strays. Okay? If you're like, hey, you know what? We're going to just grant total amnesty to all illegal immigrants in the country. Well, guess what? That means a lot of American citizens are going to be seriously negatively impacted by that. All right? All of a sudden, you now have to, pay services to these people. You now have to do all these different things that mean that the quality of life for your average American citizen is going to drop dramatically, more so than it already has. There's no such thing as solutions to these problems. The only solution to this would have been to make it so that the problem doesn't happen. Now that it's here, there's no perfect solutions. Everything is going to come with costs. This is one of them. Innocent people are going to get caught in these things. It's really bad. And I mean, hopefully, we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that, again, innocent American citizens, their rights are respected, and no permanent harm is done. Hopefully. But again, what do you expect? This is a human system. It's going to have faults. During raids and traffic stops, in June, this drama unfolded in Los Angeles. In August, in Washington, D.C., it's now happening in Chicago, and pending court challenges may happen in Portland, Oregon. More than 300 sanctuary jurisdictions exist in the United States, including those 4 cities and several entire states. According to the political scientists Lauren Collingwood and Benjamin Gonzalez O'Brien, some have passed laws barring city employees from asking individuals about their immigration status. Others will not honor requests from Immigration and Customs Enforcement to detain people unless they are suspected of violent crimes. The Trump administration's campaign to end sanctuary cities faces steep legal hurdles. But courts move slowly, and the struggle over who is obligated to enforce immigration laws appears set to intensify quickly. On September 30th, when the president addressed hundreds of active duty generals and admirals in Virginia, he suggested that the military should use American cities as training grounds. He poured vitriol on Democratic-led cities and said that inner cities were a big part of war now. Now, that's taken out of context. I mean, obviously, if that's the quote, inner cities were a big part of war now, that's the quoted part, and not inner cities were a big part of war now. If that whole thing was quoted, that'd be a thing. A big part of war now, it could be that he just means urban environments, which is a thing, which is absolutely a thing. Yeah, urban warfare is a much larger part of war in general now. Absolutely. And if that's what he's talking about, I mean, that could easily be what he's talking about here. Hey, American cities are training grounds for foreign wars, in urban environments. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of reasonable to go, hey, look at the things that are happening in American cities and look how this would impact urban warfare in foreign wars. That's a completely reasonable interpretation. Obviously, the one that they're using here is that the U.S. military, ordered by Trump, should go in and start hunting down American citizens that disagree with Donald Trump. They should be rounding people up. They should be going door to door, kicking them in, using flashbangs, spraying people down with bullets indiscriminately. All right? That's what the military should do. Donald Trump wants to oversee all of these cities with martial law. He wants to completely destroy the rule of law. He just wants absolute total authoritarian power. That's the implication here. It's the enemy from within, he said, of civil disturbances, and we have to handle it before it gets out of control. Trump is now maneuvering to deploy the Texas National Guard to both Chicago and Portland, over the objections of their mayors and governors. In California, the temporary deployment of National Guard troops has been extended through January 2026. The sanctuary movement to protect unauthorized migrants was born in 1981 as a Christian response to atrocities occurring in Central America. As Anne Crittenden notes in Sanctuary, her history of the movement, by the mid-1980s, it had become the largest civil disobedience movement in the United States since the 1960s. It involved hundreds of churches, synagogues, and Quaker meeting houses, all trying to save political refugees by using the age-old power of religious sanctuary. Again, the idea of there are atrocities being committed and we're trying to save political refugees from that. How many are they going to give me any numbers here? The amount of people that they were trying to save in their sanctuary? Are they going to give any numbers? Is it going to be like, I'm not seeing any. Let's see. So it's hundreds of churches and synagogues. So let's say it's 1,000 people. Let's say each church said, we're going to try to save 10 people. Hell, 100. Okay. So let's say there's 10,000 people. We're talking millions. That's a drop in the bucket. That's nothing. And again, America takes in 1 million legal immigrants every year. So 10,000 political refugees who, again, would actually have legitimate standing for asylum seeking if there's atrocities they're trying to escape. That would be, it's a categorically different deal than what we're dealing with right now. So to try to compare the two is very disingenuous. The backbone of today's sanctuary movement is no longer a network of religious safe houses. It is rather a collection of laws and executive orders that block federal efforts to commandeer local resources. So basically, block federal efforts to commandeer local resources. So it's not actually, I mean, again, assuming that this is an accurate description of what it is, basically the idea of sanctuary cities is just, okay, we're not going to allow the federal government to utilize our local resources, our local police force, whatever, to aid them in their federal efforts to enforce illegal, immigration laws. At its heart, the sanctuary movement is no longer only about immigration. It's about municipal governments retaining control over municipal matters in the face of federal pressure. Okay, but it's only being applied to this one thing. So trying to reframe it as this, it's just states' rights issue. It's disingenuous. It's not true. In the 1980s, during the original sanctuary movement, conservatives championed states' rights to prevent Washington from pushing environmental or gun control policies with which they disagreed. Okay, how does environmental or gun control policies have anything to do with atrocities in Central America? And the sanctuary movement. Now, conservatives championed states' rights. Okay, so I see what they did here. So in the 1980s, conservatives championed states' rights. Yes. During the original sanctuary movement. So actually, yeah, so they got me here. They tricked me. During the original sanctuary movement, there's no connection with the sanctuary movement when they're championing states' rights. It's just that it happened contemporaneously. It happened at the same time. So, hey, in the 1980s, they championed states' rights. Okay. Also, there was a sanctuary movement. They happen in the same time. They're not necessarily connected in any way, shape, or form. But the way in which this article makes it seem is that there is some connection between them. There's not. From pushing environmental or gun control policies with which they disagreed. Today's liberals are using the same constitutional principles to defend the existence of sanctuary cities. This shift is easy for casual observers to miss. In clashes with federal agents, protesters are more likely to brandish slogans like "Stop the raids" than "Protect states' rights," because this is what they believe, and this is what you're trying to push. They believe "Stop the raids." They believe nobody's illegal. They believe illegal immigration is a good thing. They believe there's no such thing as illegal immigration. And "Protect states' rights," they don't care about this at all. If they did, they would not be protesting Texas abortion bans, because that's a states' rights issue, right? Isn't that a states' rights issue? Isn't that the whole thing that Trump did, was the abortion thing is now a states' rights issue? Did they care about that? No. This is what they care about. This is what you're trying to pretend they care about, because this is what you think conservatives care about. This is true that they care about states' rights. However, we don't live in this world in which this is on the table. This is not on the table as a thing to care about. Yet understanding this history brings Trump's desire to turn the military against Americans into sharper focus. Remember how I said that that's what they were focusing on? Remember how I said that he's going to use American cities as training grounds? He's going to have martial law. He's going to take over the country. So now they're saying this. Expelling unauthorized migrants is one top objective of his administration, which again, clearly most people want. Expelling a large amount of illegal immigrants is literally something everyone said, yeah, we discussed it, we thought about it, we'd like that to happen. That's why he won. Okay, if you're going to tell me that the main issue that he's had, which was illegal immigration on the ticket, he won an overwhelming majority and now he's doing it, yeah, that's what people voted for. That's what they wanted. Another is expanding the executive branch's authority. Now, this is not something I like, but here's the other side of this, baby. This has just been happening. We've been in a nonstop. The executive branch has gotten more and more powerful, to the degree that the legislative branch, Congress, is basically doing nothing. They at this point, they have no power. They need to get off their ass and actually try to do something, but that would hurt their ability to get reelected. They like to say big things so that they can get reelected, but they're not going to actually put in any of the hard work because the hard work would actually open them up to repercussions. They could have some fallout and they might get fired. They don't want to get fired. The effort to crush sanctuary jurisdictions furthers both agendas. It helps ICE catch more illegals. Why is this in quotes? They are, illegals. And it erodes the Constitution's checks on the power of the president. An underground railroad for the 1980s. On March 24th, 1982, the Reverend John Fife hung 2 banners in Spanish on the Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson, Arizona. This is God's sanctuary for the oppressed of Central America, one read. The other expressed a plea or a demand. Immigration. Do not profane the sanctuary. That same day, Fife held a news conference announcing the existence of a movement that had, until then, been a secret. Several months earlier, Fife, the Quaker rancher James Corbett, and several other American church members and activists had been quietly transporting Central Americans into the United States and then hiding them in their homes or churches to shield them from deportation. For Fife and his friends, this was a moral mission. Thousands, so I was correct, thousands of men and women from El Salvador and Guatemala were arriving in the United States to escape torture and murder in their homelands. Again, slightly different than, I want to make more money. Once on U.S. soil, however, more than 90% of those who applied for asylum were rejected. Deported, they were handed directly back to the governments that had often marked them for death, with predictable results. By rejecting the petitions of these asylum seekers and portraying them only as economic migrants, okay, so every single one of the current, as in the current issue that we currently care about, that we're currently dealing with, not 40 years ago, but the current one, are they all asylum seekers from torture and murder that are being, if they're deported, they're immediately executed? Or are they economic migrants? I think even leftists agree they're economic migrants. They're just like, it should be okay. It shouldn't be an issue. Borders are not a thing. American officials covered up the role that they played in catalyzing the exodus. Between 1980 and 1992, the United States sent more than $4 billion to El Salvador, shoring up a series of regimes that killed at least 75,000 people and forcibly disappeared thousands more in a war against communists, labor organizers, the Catholic Church, and human rights act. This is an interesting, so communists and the Catholic Church, not really a normal match made in heaven, is it? And human rights advocates. The United States trained and equipped Salvadoran battalions that massacred entire villages and that sometimes set the bodies of women, I should say, and girls on fire after raping them. The United States stopped sending direct military aid to Guatemala in 1977, but Washington continued to funnel hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to Guatemalan refugee regimes that disappeared political dissidents and machine gun crowds of indigenous people who protested the theft of their land. Okay, this is horrible and a history lesson. This is a beautiful history lesson. Why is this connected to the thing that we're dealing with now? Because it's not connected to the thing we're dealing with now. They're doing this to manipulate you and to feel really badly about these people who are illegal immigrants. Okay, 40 years ago, this would have maybe made a difference. You could have gone, oh, okay, yeah, look, these thousands, as opposed to millions, tens of millions, thousands of people, you know what, maybe we should give them another hearing. Maybe we should think about that. I wonder if we could, do you think we can integrate those people into the, yeah, obviously, yes, of course you can. And again, this is an entirely different view on the idea of immigration. Like, it's just, it's completely I shouldn't say it's nonsensical. I know why they're doing it. They're doing it specifically to emotionally manipulate you. And you say, oh my God, what? It's like, you don't think that these people deserve some kind of, okay, yeah, that's a completely different issue from tens of millions of economic migrants illegally being in the country and then being deported. Again, are the people who are being deported to El Salvador, are they being murdered and disappeared? Or do we know exactly where they are? I think we know exactly where they are. Under these circumstances, the early leaders of the sanctuary movement became convinced that hiding unauthorized migrants was the only way to protect them from immigration officials determined to deport them, even when they faced near certain death at home. In disobeying federal laws, the sanctuary movement believed that it was acting in line with a higher Christian duty. Again, you're a bad Christian if you disagree with current sanctuary cities' policies. So they created what they called a new underground railroad for Central America. Its tracks eventually stretched all across the country, from America's southern border to the northern reaches of Washington state and Vermont. Chicago emerged as a logistical hub. As the sanctuary movement grew, elected officials came under increasing pressure from religious leaders, immigration lawyers, and Latino Americans to extend protections beyond religious buildings. And in 1985, several cities, including Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Madison, Wisconsin, ended their active cooperation with federal immigration investigations or put out statements in support of sanctuary practices. By the early 1990s, the original purpose of the sanctuary movement had, in theory, been served. In theory, as in it actually was, because this was a one-time, very specific instance wherein which this was being used for a specific purpose that kind of, makes sense. So, AKA, in theory, it had been served. AKA, it had actually been served, and therefore it should have gone away. But the United States slashed funding for military regimes in Central America, which subsequently ended their civil wars. Meanwhile, lawyers forced reforms in Americans' process for adjudicating asylum applications, and Congress created a new mechanism for protecting an entire class of immigrants in crisis, temporary protected status. For almost a decade, the sanctuary movement went dormant. Then, in the early 2000s, it woke again. Failures in foreign policy and immigration policy combined with sanctuary protections to create a new kind of American city in the 21st century. One where a substantial portion of the residents lived in the United States peacefully but illegally. In 1990, some 3.5 million, as opposed to a couple thousand, undocumented immigrants were living in the United States, according to the Pew Research Center. By 2007, that population had reached 12.2 million. Most of those immigrants were from Mexico, which has a long history of cross-border relations with the United States. But while the number of undocumented immigrants hailing from Mexico dropped off after the economic crash of 2008, the number of Central Americans kept rising. The prolonged conflicts of the 1980s had left their countries with wrecked economies and corrupted institutions, fractures that deepened in the late 1990s when the United States ramped up deportations of convicted felons to the regions. Okay, wow, what a terrible thing that the United States sent the criminals away back to the place that they came from. That's horrible. We don't like any of that stuff, right? Oh man, it makes your country worse. That's terrible that it makes your country worse, but they're your criminals. You have to deal with them. Okay? Letting them go, just go, oh yeah, go to America. And America, sent them back? What the hell is America doing? As gang violence boomed, so did the number of Central Americans moving to the United States. By 2023, according to the Pew Research Center, the United States hosted a record 14 million unauthorized immigrants. Now, does anyone believe this specific 14 million? Because here's the thing. 1990 to 2007, it goes up to, it basically, triples? And then 10 years later, by 2023, after a huge, giant wave of illegal immigration under Joe Biden, it's just 14 million. No, I don't believe that number. They came from all over the world: India, Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, Ukraine, China, Peru. But the biggest populations were from Mexico, El Salvador, and Guatemala. These demographic changes characterized the new sanctuary movement that appeared in the early 2000s, where the movement of the 1980s aimed to protect political refugees through personal acts of civil disobedience. The new movement defended all unauthorized migrants by building a legal shield to protect state and local governments from federal coercion. So, super targeted for specific, limited purposes. Everybody is legal. There's no such thing as borders. There's no such thing as illegal immigrants. There's no such thing as illegal people. Get rid of the term entirely. It's a sanctuary city. The new leaders were often undocumented immigrants who had been living in the United States for decades, or their children. They were fighting to keep their families together in the face of more aggressive enforcement tactics used by the newly created Department of Homeland Security that targeted communities farther from the border. After foreign born terrorists with expired visas crashed commercial jets into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11, 2001, the federal government intensified efforts to curb unauthorized migration. Through initiatives like Secure Communities, the Priority Enforcement Program, and the 287G program, it tried to press city employees into service as a force multiplier for ICE. The idea was to have local police officers help identify, arrest, and hold migrants for the DHS. AKA, if a local police officer finds a criminal and they turn out to also be an illegal immigrant, they hold them for DHS for deportation. Some cities, however, now had practices for not wanting their employees co-opted by federal agencies. Just let them go. Just let those criminals go, okay? Because they're going to be deported by DHS. We don't want that. That's horrible. Local and federal interests are not always aligned, and administering a cosmopolitan jurisdiction with a large population of both legal and unauthorized immigrants is a complex matter. A priority for most city governments is public safety. To ensure it, they need their multinational residents to feel comfortable reporting crime to the police. This explains why even some mayors who seem fed up with unauthorized migration, like Eric Adams in New York City, continue to defend sanctuary policies. I cannot have a city where parents are afraid to send their children to school or where children are sleeping on the streets, creating the potential for child exploitation and sex trafficking. Right, because I mean, there's nothing to do with either of these things with illegal immigration. That's definitely not a proven fact that both of these things are happening at massively increased rates because of illegal immigration. That's definitely not happening. That's definitely not a proven fact. Adams explained in written testimony submitted to Congress this March, and if an undocumented individual witnesses a crime but is afraid to call 911 for fear of being turned over to federal authorities, criminals will roam free, because criminals are not roaming free in New York City. Then there's the issue of money. Cities typically run on tight budgets. And accepting the burden of apprehending and holding migrants effectively shifts the cost of immigration enforcement to municipalities, eating into funds available for local priorities like supporting schools. In New York City, according to a 2021 report by the comptroller, it costs about $1,500 a day to hold a person in jail. We don't have to hold them in jail. You just have to hold them till they're deported. You're not going an entire long process of processing this person through the normal court system. You're going, yeah, this person's here illegally. They're going to be deported. So as DHS tries to expand its reach into city governments after September 11th, many cities responded by passing more defensive laws. In their history sanctuary cities, the politics of refuge, Collingwood and Gonzales O'Brien present Seattle as an instructive case. It had passed a city of refuge resolution in 1986 and then retracted it. Then in 2003, the city passed an ordinance that forbade police officers from asking about anyone's immigration status unless there were grounds to suspect that the person was previously deported and had committed a felony. One reason listed in the ordinance was that after September 11th, immigrants were afraid to access city benefits to which they were entitled for fear of being reported to immigration authorities. Why are illegal immigrants entitled to city benefits? Seems weird. Liberals discover states. I'm not even going to read this propaganda piece. No. They are not discovering states' rights. They don't care about states' rights. They think that that is an effective tactic to strong arm conservatives into agreeing with their position while they try to get power legally and then turn it around again. So now the whole states' rights thing is gone. They don't care about the states' rights. I'm not going to read a propaganda piece where this person is trying to actually feed me the line that, oh yeah, actually, the sanctuary cities, it's all about states' rights. Don't you know that states' rights are important? Yeah, I do. That's what I was saying 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a couple years ago. Yeah. Guess what? You were the person saying, no, that's not an issue. That's not a thing. States' rights aren't a thing. Don't, no, 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 no. Now that you think you can apply this to your thing that you want, that again, you don't believe in, you're trying to use it as a cudgel. Not happening, not working. It's not going to work anymore. We don't care. We do not care anymore. You're wrong. People voted for this. It's happening. People are happy it's happening. It's going to improve people's lives. I'm all for it. Let me know in the comments how I'm wrong. I'm not gonna, let me see if there's another bit. Nope, that's it. They end with trying to frame this entire issue as it's a states' rights issue. It's not. It's not a states' rights issue. Good luck in all your endeavors. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Farewell for now.